Yes, let's applaud ourselves.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vernon Turner from Ecosystems. I am going to be your host and moderator for the panel for the next 45 minutes. And this is interesting. This is your opportunity to get free consulting from industry analysts and consulting. So when we do the Q&A, don't be shy about coming up to the microphone. This is an interesting location for me because 6 years ago, I came to Barcelona for what I think was possibly the first IoT World Summit as part of the Cisco IoT initiative that they had an event here. And it was interesting because at that event, there was a number, if anybody here can remember, does anybody remember how big the IoT market could be in 2021 or 2022? $14.3 trillion was the number. So it's appropriate that today the session, the title is The Hits and Misses of IoT. And as we all know, when we're gambling or willing to put your neck on the line, doing a forecast is one of the first places where you put yourself out there. In my role as an industry analyst in my prior company, one of my colleagues who's on the panel today and I looked at the IoT forecast from a technology standpoint, and we used a mobile methodology. In other words, looking at the mobile market and decided to say, well, how much would customers be willing to spend on IoT? And we thought we were doing really well. We went from $14 trillion to $7 trillion. And of course, when we ran those numbers a little longer, we changed the methodology. And the argument I'm making again here is that forecasts can be great if you're looking for funding. Forecasts can be terrible if you're in sales and someone sets a sales target for you. So with that, as a precursor to the discussion this afternoon on the hits and misses of IoT, let me walk over here and let the panel introduce themselves. So go ahead, Carrie.
I'm trying to. Great, thanks, Vernon. My name's Carrie McGilvery, and I'm Group Vice President with IDC. Worked a very long time with Vernon as we co-founded our IoT practice at IDC. I'm now responsible for our worldwide IoT research. I've been an analyst for 15 years covering emerging technology, and I started doing that when mobile phones were just coming into our pockets, and the first smartphones were coming into our hands. So I've watched this market of mobility and wireless and connected things unfold over the last 15 years. So I'm excited to be here and appreciate being on this esteemed panel with my peers. Thanks.
So I'm Prith Banerjee. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of ANSYS. I just joined the company about 2 weeks ago. I am super excited to be on this panel because I have been working on the IoT topic for more than 10 years. Started working on IoT when I was director of HP Labs, and we had this project called the Sense IoT platform. Then when I was CTO and Executive Vice President of ABB, I was part of the Ability platform for ABB. Then I was at Schneider Electric, worked on the EcoStruxure IoT platform. And at Accenture, worked on the CPaaS platform. So I've sort of worked in operational role in various IoT platforms. I've sort of seen what the future is for these industrial companies and what has worked and what has not. So I'm going to share some of my personal experiences in the panel today.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Brumer. I am a founding partner of 151 Advisors. We are an international strategy advisory, and on this panel, I'm allowed to say it without conviction, a consulting firm. We help companies with their monetization and commercialization strategies. So for me, it's all about making money. I've been in the wireless business 32 years, started out in two-way radios way back. And I've been in machine-to-machine, this IoT thing, machine-to-machine for almost 21 years, having been involved with the first Coca-Cola machine way back in the old days. Anybody remember RAM Mobile Data or CDPD? That's where we started in machine-to-machine a long time ago. We are all here to try and make money with the companies that we are involved in, whether that's products, software, platforms, or services. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we have right now is if I were to ask someone to, people raise your hand if you are a profitable IoT organization today. Okay? So the ones that are embarrassed, there's 3 people that raised their hand. And I think that's the challenge that we have. That's the miss that we have today in the idea of how do we all figure out how to get our clients, and this is the great thing about this event, which I love it, and that's we're all in this IoT thing. So if we were at Mobile World Congress, some would be in IoT, some would be in mobile, and they'd be everywhere, but we all are in the same space. Making money and trying to figure out the best way to reduce the sales cycle, figure out what is the best way to sell our products, whether it's direct or through channels, trying to understand what the value proposition is, very critical. It's easy to talk about, but we have to explain it to people that don't understand the business as well as we do. And so that is the challenge that I see, and that's one of the things that we concentrate on at 151 Advisors.
Great. Thanks, Steve. My name's Akash Bhatia. I'm a partner with BCG. BCG is a consulting firm based in San Francisco, heart of the tech land. I've been doing tech and tech-related consulting for the last about 18, 19 years. And I lead some of the disruptive technologies area at BCG and also co-lead the IoT. We don't have a practice, but the area. So very happy to be here.
Thank you, everyone. So let me kick off the discussion by asking Prith a fairly upbeat question, as opposed to thinking why things haven't worked. What are the IoT use cases that you've seen that have stuck or have had some level of stickiness? Based on your pedigree, what are the startups doing in this space?
Thank you, Vernon. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I had the fortune of working at ABB and Schneider. So these are large industrial companies. And the reason they are interested in IoT, right, the CEO, why they sort of hired me in the first place was to tap this $14 trillion market that Vernon is talking about, right? So these industrial companies, they make industrial grade products like a transformer from ABB or a breaker or a panel from Schneider Electric. And the IoT journey for them is take that product, make it into a connected product. It's still selling for $100,000. It's just a bigger, fancier product. But the next use case, which is the real low-hanging fruit for much of the industrial companies, is remote services. When a transformer dies, you lose power, and you, the customer, call up a utility and say, hey, I lost power. Today, ABB or Schneider or GE or Honeywell, they will know as soon as that transformer dies, it's gone, right? And so what that allows them to do is to tap into the services market. These product companies in the industrial world, their EBITDA margins are like 13, 14%, very low margin business. The services businesses typically are 25%. Now, suppose you sell a transformer for $100,000. 15% is the average price of a service per year. $15,000, you're going to service the transformer on their dime, right? And so when the transformer dies, in the past, you call up, the repair person shows up, unscrews the transformer, doesn't know what's going on. Finally, after 6 hours, oh, this coil went, I need a replacement coil. Order replacement part from Zurich, comes in, does another thing, and then fixes the transformer. The cost of the service is quite high. In the IoT world, because it's connected, by the time the repair person shows up, knows exactly where the problem is, and half the time they can remotely fix the transformer, or when they cannot, they can bring the spare part with them, so the cost of the service of the transformer went down. Because it is IoT connected transformer, oh, by the way, instead of 15%, they charge 20%. So it's $20,000, and the cost of service went down. So an already high margin business became even higher margin. That is why they are all doing this, right? So the most common use case is remote services. Now, the next step along the journey is what is called predictive analytics, and you all have seen this, right? So by monitoring the voltage, current, et cetera, they can predict the fact that transformer will die next Thursday. Hey, Prith, I think your transformer will die next Thursday. Can I replace it on Wednesday? Sure, because I don't want any downtime. That is worth a lot of money. The challenge with the predictive analytics is the quality of the analytics is today at about 60%, right? So with all the machine learning, et cetera, you're not that accurate. So it's $1 million part with an accuracy of 60%, you have wasted $400,000. That's kind of not a good thing, right? So what people are doing is to take the machine learning part combined with physics-based modeling, and that's why I'm super excited about ANSYS. ANSYS does the simulation-based multi-physics modeling of all those parts to predict exactly why that thing is going to fail, up that prediction to 90-95%, and you have a winner. So that's the journey. Connected products, remote services, predictive analytics, all the way to outcome-based services like farming as a service or energy as a service. The companies have not quite been successful in that area, but asset performance management, APM, which is sort of the remote services, along with the predictive analytics, is making a lot of money for the reasons that I talked about.
So, Prith, thanks very much for that. I like the idea of making lots of money. It's a good idea. But what I think is you've also highlighted that perhaps at the beginning, focused on point solutions was a bad idea. We should probably go for end-to-end solutions. And we should have, if we had a crystal ball to do it all over again, IoT plus AI plus machine learning, if we could put it all into a secret ball of wax and give it to everybody, perhaps the industry might have gone a little bit different. Carrie, in your role at IDC, are there any particular industry misses or hits that you've come across that you've seen in the last 5 or 6 years?
Well, I think from our perspective, when we first launched our IoT research practice, we were asked a lot of times 3 questions. Who's going to be the leader in this market? What's going to be the one standard? And what's going to be the primary connectivity method? And are all these solutions going to be horizontally offered? And if you look back on those 4 attributes, none of those have transpired, but I actually think it's for the good. Because had there been one leader, most of us wouldn't be here today talking about this ecosystem approach that IoT has created. That we have to bring together the hardware vendors, the software vendors, the services firms, the connectivity to work together to build specific use cases. There's no vendor out there who can provide essentially an end-to-end solution in a box and hand it off to a customer. So I think that actually turns into a positive that there wasn't a leader. When you think about standards, you also have to think about the requirements across all these different use cases. And Prith, you gave some really good examples. And it's not possible to have one specific standard. And then you go to connectivity. Was there going to be a type of connectivity that would win? Was cellular going to be the penultimate connectivity method? No. It depends on the use case. And what we're seeing unfold today is that it's really a hybrid network approach. Depending on the use case, you can use cellular for the backhaul, but then for the short range, you can use Wi-Fi, you can use Bluetooth. You might even start to incorporate low power WAN into the solution, or even fixed. There's a lot of connections out there that are still using fixed connections. So I think that opens opportunities for multiple players. And then the last piece is around horizontal. So when the initial platforms were being brought to market, or the early pioneers in the IoT platform space, a lot of their offers were very horizontal, and they quickly learned that they needed to verticalize and industrialize their platforms to meet the needs of their customers. So again, I think that it's fostered this ecosystem market, because previous to IoT, I was looking at the mobile market, and I look back on the mobile market in 2006, and I look at the mobile market in 2018. There's still a number of device manufacturers. There's a few OSs that exist, and those OSs are the only platforms that we're using. But we saw that as an overlay to the technology we were using. Whereas with IoT, it becomes embedded in the technology we were using before, but also creates new technology opportunities. So I think it's a miss in terms of what we're going to be the one leader, one standard, one connectivity, horizontal offering, into the fact that this market is much more complex, but also dynamic compared to many other technology markets.
Remind me to take you to Las Vegas and help me place bets in. But it's interesting. I just want to catch you on one of those things. This morning I heard an interesting analogy about the connectivity discussion. This person described it as, why are we talking about connectivity as one size fits all. They used the analogy of shoes. We all have shoes. But if you go to the beach, you have sandals. If you go to the gym, you have running shoes or trainers. If you go out to dinner, you have a nice pair of dress shoes. In other words, meet the requirements. Use the technology to meet the application requirements. Otherwise, you end up with barefoot or wearing mountain boots in the wrong place. I want to dig a little bit deeper here now. And Akash, one of the things that we talk about here at IoT is there a technology limitation, or is technology a limiting factor to make this a reality?
Yeah. So maybe two things I'll talk about. One is, I think we've been talking about this IoT market as if this is one monolithic thing. I actually hate that. This is not, it's like almost talking about the internet as a market. Like no one talks about that anymore. I think the IoT market has to be, and Carrie, you said it well, it's a set of use cases that need to go implemented. So I think that's one mentality that's at least served us to be useful. Please don't talk about the IoT market as a whole. It's good for analysts and TAMs and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's specific use cases. Now, the second part of the question, or actually I just added that one in, but like I think the question that you have is on tech. I actually have a pretty strong opinion on this. I don't think tech, and maybe the tech vendors disagree, or maybe people who are implementing this stuff disagree. I don't think tech is a limitation. I think there's been a plethora of tech, even before this term became widespread. I think a case in point, if you look at the number of platforms out there, I think we stopped counting after about 250. Like BCG did a study where it said, okay, how many IoT platforms out there? Honestly, we had a spreadsheet, we're like looking at all these things and we said, stop. And it's crazy. And I think for average people who want to go and build a connected solution, which is not that hard, right? You should be able to use the tech to do it. I think the failure, and you'll probably get to this, Vernon, right, is the failures are in other parts in terms of imagination, in terms of business models, in terms of not thinking through how to use the data, but definitely not in the tech.
So can I just push you just a little bit on that?
Yeah.
So is organizational structure one of the failure points as opposed to tech?
I think it depends on the kind of company that you're thinking about. I think there's a couple of archetypes maybe. One would be like either technology providers that want to sell IoT solutions on top of it. So that's one archetype. The other is what I would call the civilians, which are just trying to run their business, and they use IoT just like they would use any other technology. I think the tech companies, their organizational structures, if you look at Azure or GCP or any of the cloud players, they just want to run the meters. So I don't think there's any organizational dysfunction there. I think those are working well. I think if you look at the civilian population, the non-tech providers, the non-solution providers, I think for them, it is harder. I think less on the, I think you mentioned the services one. Prith, I would love your opinion on this. I think sometimes there's a clash between existing lines of revenue and how one may cannibalize the other. So service is a classic example. If we do this, is it going to actually cannibalize our revenue? And so I think being clear on the incentive structure and where those people report into plays a role.
Thank you. Steve, you made it clear at the beginning, it's all about the money, like a Wall Street movie.
Someone's got to think about it.
And so I think you asked in the audience how many people were making money out of IoT, and one hand was probably plenty of fingers. So what is the monetization model for IoT?
I think one of the challenges we have is
and by the way, if you answer this really well, there'll be a line of people wanting to engage in your services. So
I'd love that.
There you go.
Then I can make money. Is that what you're saying? So I think one of the challenges that we have to figure out in how to make money is talking to the end user and trying to solve their problem. I know it sounds very, very simple and basic, but it is. When you look at the idea of talking to the customer and saying, tell me what you want. What's the problem that you want to solve? Is it you want to measure the temperature? Do you want to know where your asset is? Try and figure out what it is, because whatever product you're going to implement at that end user, someone's selling that to another person. And you have to understand that there's a model of salespeople out there that are going to be the ones that are going to move that product into the end user. And so we have a challenge there of trying to figure that part out. The monetization from a sales perspective is making this as simple as I hate to say the KISS theory still needs to be alive, but because of the challenges of how many things are involved in a solution on the IoT side, keeping it as simple to the person that's signing the check ultimately is critical to be able to do that. I mean, I know we're not supposed to talk about consumer, but how many people here have gone into a consumer retail place to buy an IoT home automation product? Have you tried to talk to a salesperson on the floor and try and get a straight answer? Have you been to an Apple store and talked to one, and I know there's a lot of younger people here, and a kid in a blue t-shirt and talk about a Nest thermostat and the training and the lack of education sometimes that happens? Well, it's the same thing in the industrial side. We have a challenge with education. We owe it to the people that are in our organizations as well as who we sell to educate them to better understand what the nuances are. And once we have educated them, they will see the value. They will understand the value proposition that IoT and industrial IoT has. And that will help us be able to get those sales and get the numbers up so that we do achieve the numbers. Even if all the soothsayers and the Carrie numbers are there are a lot of numbers associated with devices in the IoT space. And I, for one, want to be a part of making that happen so that we know that we have all made money in this business. I would love to be on this stage a year from now, and instead of 3 people raising their hands as who's a profitable IoT company, that half of you out there have figured out the model for making money within IoT.
I think I'm actually going to play a bit of a contrarian, and Steve, you'd expect that from me. But,
well, considering we've been doing that for 15 years, I got it.
We've just got some survey results back where we've surveyed 5,000 end users about IoT and their adoption. This year we started to explore monetization, and we asked questions around what is your business model around IoT? And the top 3 areas that they're focused on in terms of making money is all internal. We want to reduce the costs. We want to help improve the efficiencies. There's not talk about reselling data, because us as analysts and consultants, we're often talking about where the future's going and where we're going to be able to sell data and we're going to be able to make money from selling that data. These organizations aren't there yet. They're looking to save money, not necessarily even make money. And saving money allows them to invest elsewhere where they could also make money. But they don't see that path to that value chain.
And I totally agree with you. I think, but that's a problem that they're solving, right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying that the salespeople out there have got to understand what the customer is absolutely looking for and willing to sell them what they want, not what they think they should have.
Yeah, and I think that this world of data as a service at some point is something that we're going to all live with, but I'm not sure that enterprises, at least in the results that we've gotten back from this study, show that they're actually ready to start thinking about how they can reuse the data or resell the data in ways to make additional revenue.
I would like to add a couple of points to what Carrie and Steve just mentioned. I am a strong believer in end-to-end IoT solutions, as Akash just said, right? Initially, people were selling horizontal solutions, but the end user cares about the business outcome, right? So what does a plant manager of a plastics manufacturing plant care about, right? Well, operational efficiency. So either growing top-line revenue or bottom-line savings. If you're the CEO of a company, that's the only metric you care about. Sometimes you care about customer experience and so on, but look at those business outcomes, and IoT is just a technology to enable you to get to those business outcomes, right? And so, I know, Vernon, you asked a question, and what about startups, right? I have seen lots of startups who have tried to do yet another platform, those 250 platforms you're talking about. Those are hard to sell. But if you you take that horizontal solution, you flip it around, pivot it, do a vertical, those IoT solutions, and that resonates with the plant owner of a plastics factory in Des Moines, Iowa, wow, you have a winner, right?
Sell it.
The other point I would say is that the $14 trillion that you named, Vernon, there is so much fragmentation in the end-to-end solutions, right? So I have a quote that I would like to share. It's 1 million use cases of $1 million each. So there is no one market, say $10 billion, where, oh, the Honeywells and the Schneiders can make a lot of money, right? It's 1 million use cases of each one having $1 million, which is why we have so many POCs and pilots and so on. It is a very fragmented market. But to be successful, there are startups who are picking one narrow slice of a, as Akash was saying, right? Narrow slice of a vertical use case and making that business case resonate with the end user, and there you have a winner.
So Akash, I just want to ask you, based on this slicing, did we miss the market? Even if you slice it so thin, can a company deliver the solution by themselves? Or do we still need to have a partnership, an ecosystem? And I think the question I want to ask you is, if the answer is it's an ecosystem, how do you monetize your sliver in that ecosystem of $1 million solution and you got 10 partners?
Yeah. Look, I think the glib answer is, of course, you need an ecosystem. We've been saying this for years on IoT. You know, you need like the SIs, you need the platform providers, you need software device manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I think that's a glib answer. I think for the commercial, the industrial or non-consumer side of it is probably true. The thing that gives me pause is on the non-consumer side. If you look at what Amazon's doing, right, with the whole Echo and all the things that they're doing, or other companies like that, a more vertical strategy is working when they're doing more of each slice of it. They're not just like handing off pieces of it, but they have more of like an Apple strategy. So I hesitate on that. Coming back to your question, I think it's a failure of imagination. I think IoT has been around so long that boards understand it, CEOs understand it, CTOs definitely understand it, CIOs have been understanding it for. I think it's more a failure of speed and execution and a failure of imagination on how we could share some of these revenue gains between each other. If you think about it, IoT is, like you said, like Prith, is just any other technology. It's going to be the same thing. If you fast forward 5 years, all the packaged applications companies, if you take like SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, et cetera, they're going to package these things into their apps already. It's going to be IoT in the process. So there's a short period of time between now and then of competitive advantage that companies can take of doing something that's different from their peers that they can't just buy off the shelf. And I think actually they're not moving fast enough. In 5 years, if it's all packaged and everyone has the same ERP solution, where's the competitive differentiation? There isn't any, right? So I think it's less a failure of like any technology or anything like that. It's just a failure of speed and getting on it. Maybe that's too simplistic, but.
You know, in some ways, it sounds like what you're describing is the financial services industry about how to do trades. Everybody can execute a trade. It costs the same thing of Merrill Lynch versus Morgan Stanley, whoever. It's how you execute, and that's where your IP comes in. So I'm gonna ask the elephant in the room question when it comes to hit or misses in IoT, and I'd love to get both Steve and Carrie's opinion. 5G. So is that something that we're still waiting for, and therefore will be a hit at some point, or have we waited so long that there are other disruptive technologies that could make 5G a miss? And you're both industry analysts, or you both have mobile backgrounds, so you should have plenty to say about this one.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I think by saying it's going to be a hit, it goes back to my comment, is that there's not one connectivity that's going to solve for anything. It's going to be very use case specific. I come from the North American market where the hype around 5G is fever pitch. Here I think it's a bit more muted. And in the North American market, it's 5G is going to solve for everything. We're going to be doing remote surgery in the next 2 years. Cars are going to be driving autonomously. The world is fundamentally going to change. And my view is that that's not a reality. The deployments aren't even going to be fully ubiquitous in 2 years, especially when we're just starting to see the early hints of mobile 5G maybe hitting this year in the US market. So 5G, I think it's a conversation starter because it's captured the interest of CIOs and CEOs and lines of business that, oh, it's a fast, big pipe. What can I do with it? Well, it goes back again to my comment around hybrid networks. And so it's a next generation technology. It's new and it's sexy, but I don't think it can be used in isolation for a number of different use cases. And we hear the connected vehicle as obviously like the top spot use case, but I think we have to look at other use cases where it might be in manufacturing, it might be in retail, it might be in other parts of transportation, or eventually maybe in healthcare, although I think that's a real long tail use case because of regulatory requirements and getting through approvals. But I think it's a conversation starter, and you can bundle 5G with low power WAN solutions, with fixed solutions, with Wi-Fi solutions to create a hybrid approach to solving a use case that needs maybe that big pipe as a backhaul that allows you for that mobile capability. But is it a solution for all? No, but nothing solves for all of IoT right now.
And I think we agree.
Okay, for
Yay,
once,
the
yay,
first
okay,
time.
that's good, yeah.
Not first time, but
Yeah. Maybe
I think when we look at Asia, the Asian markets, and we look at what China's doing with 5G versus the rest of the world, there's your case study on what they're doing with it. And it's limited, but it's growing rapidly versus what we have in the rest of the world. I have clients that are putting 2G out there today, buying 2G modules by the thousands and putting them into networks in South America and Africa. 2G, and it works perfectly. And I think that's where we're getting with, I don't care if it's 2G, 3G, or 4G. We got to sell what we have in our bag today. That's a classic sales guy's comment. Sell what you have in your bag today. And we have all the solutions that could possibly do we need something with that latency today? I don't see it. I don't see that absolute need.
Maybe video.
Video would be great, but is that IoT?
Yeah.
And I think we also have a small cell scenario. You know, where are we going to go with CBRS and being able to put small cells? Are we going to put a small cell everywhere on the interstates and the freeways and be able to get that kind of information, that 5G connectivity to a car? That's going to be a lot of build out.
Well, and you also have to think even about the device form factor,
Right.
because a 5G radio is going to take a lot more battery power than a little LoRaWAN sensor that's
Right.
sitting on a water meter. So you have to. It all goes down to the use case and where can we actually where is the big bandwidth, low latency actually a reasonable differentiator, and can it actually work in the form factor that we need to put on that endpoint?
And if we're looking at some of the prices that Deutsche Telekom came out with, as well as T-Mobile came out with on NB-IoT programs, where we're talking about 50 cents a month for data throughputs. Where's 5G? Are you going to tell me is it going to be free? So I just did Mobile World Congress Shanghai, and China Unicom and many of the other carriers were talking about the possibility that 5G IoT data will be free because they're going to make so much more money on the services that they're going to be providing as part of that. Kind of changes the model overall, but makes sense when you're looking at we all are having to sell services as we continue to look at costs of airtime going down, modules and any of the technology products going down in cost. It's services, as you were saying before.
So there is actually one use case that I want to kind of share about. I know you mentioned the connected vehicle, but for 5G, because of the low latency and the high bandwidth, that will enable one of the sort of the $3 or $4 trillion market of smart manufacturing. If you look at the McKinsey number, the $11 trillion, the factory part is 3 to 4 trillion. Now, again, I used to live that world of ABB and Schneider and so on. You look at those factories are run by automation systems from Siemens, ABB, et cetera, right? And those have real-time constraints. So you put an IoT solution on that process automation system or a building management system, right? That there is that door, if it has a sensor, and when there's a fire, you're supposed to close that door. That is a closed loop. You don't want to wait for a 3G connection to connect through AT&T and then back. That round-trip latency is so much that the fire will kill you. So for those kind of applications, you need to have that real low latency, high bandwidth. And so people today in the manufacturing automation space have not actually used IoT for the control part. They have used it for the read part and analyzing, but not that close the loop. 5G will allow them to close the loop, and if successful, that would be a really, really big market. But again, time will tell. But I'm personally very excited about, I mean, I've talked to the head of Bell Labs about this, and so if they can nail that, I think most of the automation systems, and now there are some demos here about TSN, time-sensitive networks and so on, those are all working with wired Ethernets, but 5G will allow it to work with, anyway, I'm going into the technical stuff, but that is a huge market.
So I want to move the discussion a little bit past the 5G technology thing. And Akash, I want to ask you about staff and education and the ability to have the right skill sets in an IoT world. Have we overshot that? I mean, in the sense of we underestimated the complexity of an IoT solution, and therefore really haven't decided, is this an IT function, or is this a BU function, and do we have the right skills based on what we have to deliver?
I think the short answer is we've underestimated the complexity and outsourced too much of that to IT. So that's the short answer. I think the heart of IoT, of course, is data. I think getting to data to the data lake or the platform is only part of the challenge. That's what most people talk about. But the value, of course, is in the apps and analytics. I think where people have underestimated the domain knowledge as well as the data science chops is in that analytics layer. I'm stating the obvious, but I think if you think about larger company, if I think about larger companies investing, they haven't invested enough in that top layer. They've invested a lot in again, the talk is more technology. How do I get the platform? How do I get the connectivity? But it's less on the data science, it's less on the domain knowledge that Prith was talking about. I think people should over-invest in that. Again, the bottom part is all going to be commodity, right? So.
I completely agree with you, and I think that we need to close a loop on that too, is that when these projects are being deployed or being ideated, engineering staff or product management has this vision of where it's going to go and how it's going to solve a business problem. But we need to link the engineers with the data scientists who are at the top of that stack to ideate on what kind of data is going to come out and what the data folks and the analytics folks can actually do with the data. Because I don't know how many end users I've spoken to who said, we didn't know we were going to get this much data out of this IoT project. We thought we were solving for X, and we actually got A, B, C, X, Y, Z out of it in terms of data. And it's because they didn't bring together that, they thought of data as the last step, whereas understanding where the data, what the data is going to be or possibly could be, it should be part of that ideation phase so you can use it more quickly.
So Carrie, in the survey you did, we're seeing that, what, 15% of the people, the data is being used and analyzed. Did you see that? Was that a result?
Yeah, and that they're not
optimized.
They're not using it across the organization. It's still only solving for a business problem. But they realize they have all these reams of data, and they don't know what to do with this extra data that actually might solve 3, 4, 5 other business problems or drive efficiencies in other parts of the organization.
But I think it goes back to Akash's point, the imagination. I mean, it seems like we really are severe challenge when it comes to this. We're solving for a point product as opposed to being innovative and
I think just to build on that, I think it's on us. It's in the people in the room. It's outside the people in the room who actually understand the business processes, just to rethink every single business process. It's as simple as this. Every single business process can now be fed with data that you didn't have before, to put it very simply. What does that enable? I don't think people are taking a step back and fundamentally looking at these processes. And I think that's where the opportunity, you can rethink it. And, two other words that we haven't mentioned here, and, we always talk about, like, this is the IoT use case. Oh, then there's a blockchain use case, there's an ML use case. Of course, they're not separate. I mean, these things come together. ML definitely, even if there's just the non-sexy analytics part of it. But blockchain increasingly as well. So it's the failure of imagination, not, I think, anything to do with the tech.
So I want to ask Steve a question. In the sense of building on this notion of end-to-end, and I think as a panel, we're agreeing that the value is further up the stack. Have we over-rotated on the edge compute discussion? I mean, in the sense of, if you think about and I'm not going to ask for a definition of the edge, by the way, we'll be here all day, but a lot of focus right now seems to be, we're going to build out the edge, and I think that rightly so because of the distributed compute model. But if I listen to the panel today, a lot of the business value is not on the edge. Ultimately, it's back in the integrated systems in the enterprise or the operation side. Have we, again, had a miss on the value proposition of how to position the edge?
I don't think we've missed. I mean, it's very evident by being on the floor today to see how many versus last year edge-related companies and gateway companies are here. You know, last year was a handful, and I don't know, 15, 20 different groups out there have edge boxes or products. So it is a critical piece of what's going on, but you just can't just sell an edge box. There's a lot more that has to go through as far as the software and the integration and and being agnostic to whatever the customer's end using devices are going to look like. But it has changed dramatically. It's going to be the same thing with security. The security changes that we've seen on the floor a year later are significant. Security on the edge, security, you know, whether it's an eSIM scenario or a full platform. So I think all of that is changing. A lot more companies are getting into it, which is fantastic because we have better technology coming out all the time.
Let me share my perspective on sort of the edge from a couple of companies that I worked at, ABB and Schneider, right? And I gave that example of the manufacturing floor, you're doing a little automation system, you have a building management system, you're doing that building management. Those are solutions at the edge. But then you take the data from that edge and you do certain things at the cloud. So essentially through IoT, what you're doing is you're doing a system of systems optimization. You cannot take all the data from those sensors and ship everything to the cloud because the round trip delay is minus 5G. 5G will enable all kinds of stuff, but it is very, very hard to do everything on the cloud, right? And so what all these companies are doing is saying, I'm going to do a lot of the compute on the edge, most of the compute on the edge, and only send sort of compressed data to the cloud, right? The analogy is when NASA sends a satellite to Jupiter, they don't send pixel bits, ones and zeros back to Earth. They do a lot of compute on Jupiter, on the satellite, and only sending sort of the lines and so on, right? So essentially, they are doing edge computing. But this is literally the way companies, at least in the industrial space, will realize the value through a commonly working edge solution with the cloud as a system of systems optimization.
So we're almost out of time here. So I want to go into the last round of somewhat rapid-fire questions. But the goal here is for each of you to give your opinion. What's the next thing that's going to be successful in IoT? Carrie, do you want to go for it?
The next thing that's going to be successful in IoT, I think we're still underestimating the role of the systems integrator. And I think that integration challenge still needs to be overcome, and I think there's good opportunity there. So the next big success, I don't know, but I think that's a next big growth area. I think the systems integrators are waiting with bated breath on when it's going to hit and when they're going to start getting more than five-digit deals. They're going to get 6-, 7-digit deals. I'd say over the next 12, 18 months as companies start to scale and need that integration.
Prith.
I think anybody who figures out this sort of data as a service, so with IoT, industrial data, everybody's collecting a lot of data, right? But somebody will figure out that the quality of search on Google is better because they do so many searches every day. You cannot be a search company, a startup, no matter how good a search algorithm you have unless you have access to the amount of data that Google has. So the equivalent thing in the industrial IoT world is if somebody can figure out that data sharing thing that is taking data from the Honeywell devices and the Schneider and the GE and the Siemens and so on, and figuring out that aggregator stuff and then essentially figuring out the monetization model of data as a service is going to win.
the SIs would do that. Steve?
I think the growth of the industry is going to come from the mid-tier and the SMB areas. And I think I agree with Carrie on this one that systems integration is one of the biggest challenges we have. And if you look at a VAR and SI and reseller and dealer model in there, that is the ones that are having account control, figuring out, it's not going to get to IoT in a box, but getting to the point of where that is IoT is a package product that a mid-tier SMB-focused VAR and integrator can actually deploy on its own. We're going to see the significant numbers grow across the world in that particular case. And I also think that education is one of the biggest holes. We have to figure out a way. There's, the certification, okay, but being trained on it, trying to get college students to better understand what IoT is about. So we have a big hole in our education model.
I think for me, it might be the verticalization, just like, having one company take entire use cases and actually do them as the lead. That might be one sort of model. And the other one that I can think of is almost like the Amazon buying Whole Foods. Like there's like some disruptive thing that someone's going to do, and then everyone's going to wake up and say, oh my God, why are we waiting so long? Why are we taking so long?
So we're out of time for the panel, but I'm willing to offer up the microphone to a couple of questions if there's anyone here who has a burning question.
To come to the microphone.
Okay, can you come to the microphone just up there?
With all the different use cases, a million use cases you mentioned, is it possible to even have some standards apply to all of this, and would that help the growth?
Come on, standards.
No, not standards, but winners. So I will mention, so I've looked at lots and lots of startups in this space, and the startups that have been successful are, as Akash was saying, truly verticalizing, providing value to the end user. So an example startup is Samsara Networks, and I don't work for Samsara, I'm just very excited about it. So they came up with a solution for asset tracking for trucks. There are lots of fleets and fleets of trucks, and they don't sell it to UPS or FedEx. They're selling to the small, medium businesses a group of trucks for your local sort of grocery store or whatever, right? And they have like 20 trucks, but that owner of that trucking company absolutely cares about whether the vegetables are delivered at the right temperature or not. So those kinds of verticalized solutions, I completely agree with Akash, right? Those will be the winners. Unfortunately, there is $1 million of money to be made for that startup in that trucking industry, and that's how sort of Samsara is making, they have 2,500 SMB customers, right? Use case by use case, they're making money, but those will be the winners.
But he does bring up a great question about standards and the total lack of standards that we really have within the industry. But the average person who is buying that solution doesn't ask us about standards.
So I want to thank the panel.
There's
Sorry.
a question.
There's a question over here. Oh, I'm sorry.
And then we can
Really quick, you didn't talk a lot about artificial intelligence, but you did say a little bit about video. But don't you think the adoption of video and artificial intelligence in IoT is a kind of slow-burning success story, which may not be an overnight hit, but maybe a hit over time?
Yeah, I talked about this yesterday, actually, in my presentation. I think IoT lays the fabric of what artificial intelligence can be built upon, because it's probably the most critical data source, because it's pulling data from everything. But when you think about video, you can think about video as an endpoint, because a video camera is an endpoint sitting on the end of a network, now that we have so many IP cameras out there. But that video camera can also provide context to other IoT devices that are in its vicinity. So I think video is actually one of those horizontally type of use cases that could see some real uptake, that's going to drive artificial intelligence. It's going to need a big network, maybe 5G. Like, it could be the one that, like you say, is a slow burn. Yep,
Great
thanks.
question.
So with that, thank you very much for attending, and to the panel, thank you very much for a great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.